The first thing that hit me was the smell. That sweet, rotten stench that twists your gut and sets every instinct screaming danger. I was checking on my stash of corn mash when I found the tracks. 18 inches long, sunk deep into the Wyoming mud. 5 toes human-like, but 3 times the size. That was the moment I knew. My moonshining operation had drawn the attention of something that wasn't supposed to exist. My name's Jake Harland. For 8 years, I ran a secret still out in the Wind River Range, cooking corn liquor under the radar. Not exactly legal, but out here, federal agents are the least of your worries. This land swallows people whole. Grizzlies, mountain lions, winters that drop to 40 below. But nothing prepared me for what started haunting my camp in the fall of 2019. I'd been using the same spot for 3 years, perfect location. Fresh spring water, thick pine cover, caves that vented smoke. Nearest town was 37 miles over rough country. No roads, no trails, just wilderness. No sane person traveled without a guide. The first sign came in September. I'd left a batch to ferment while I rode into town for supplies. Takes about 5 days to get a good mash at those temps. When I came back, something felt wrong. Nothing had been moved, but it was like somebody or something had gone over my gear without leaving a fingerprint. Then I saw them, footprints circling the fire pit. Not bear prints, I knew those well. These were different, human-like, but massive. A 6-foot stride, step to step, walking straight through my camp, pausing at the still, and heading back into the timber. Any smart man would have packed up and moved on, but I had 12 gallons of high-proof shine ready to bottle and buyers who didn't take kindly to delays. So I stayed. I loaded my rifle and told myself it was some prank. That night I heard it. 3 deliberate knocks on a tree about 200 yards off. The sound rolled through the valley like thunder. I've heard woodpeckers. I've heard branches snap. This wasn't that. This was intentional. I sat awake till dawn, back against a boulder, rifle across my lap, eyes on the tree line. Around 3 a.m., something flashed in the firelight. 2 eyes, too high to be a wolf, too solid to be an owl. It stood there 20 minutes, silent, before melting back into the dark. Come morning, I found more tracks. The ground packed down heavy. Branches snapped 9 feet off the ground where it had braced against a tree. That's when the size hit me. 9 feet tall. What kind of creature stands nearly 3 meters and walks upright? I had a choice. Tear it all down and lose everything I'd built, or stay and face whatever this was. Wisdom said leave. Stubbornness said stay. This was my ground, my still, my rules. I wasn't about to let some giant ape chase me out. So I adapted. I started leaving food at the edge of camp. Scraps, mostly beans, cornbread, jerky. By morning, they'd be gone. No mess, no bones, no scatter like with a bear. Just gone. And always those massive tracks leading back into the woods. 2 weeks in, something extraordinary happened. I was tending the condenser one evening when I heard slow, heavy footsteps behind me. My rifle was leaned against a tree 20 feet away, might as well have been 20 miles. I turned slow, hands visible, careful not to spook whatever it was, and there it stood, 9 feet of muscle and dark brown hair looming at the tree line like it belonged there. Its face not quite human, but close. Broader, deeper set eyes that glowed in the firelight. The smell hit me next. Wet dog mixed with something older, earthier. We locked eyes. Felt like hours, but maybe half a minute. Then I did something I never thought I would. I spoke. Easy there, friend. I don't want any trouble. It cocked its head, nostrils flaring, sizing me up. And then it sat down, dropped onto its haunches like a man ready for conversation, even though it still towered over me. I just kept talking. About the still, the weather, whatever popped into my head. My voice seemed to settle it, or maybe it was just curious about the strange noise I made. Either way, it stayed an hour, listening, tilting its head as I rambled. When it finally stood, it stopped by the food scraps I'd left. But instead of snatching them, it looked at me first, then the food, then back again like it was asking permission. I nodded. It scooped the food gently, almost politely, before slipping back into the night. That became our routine. Every few nights it came back. I'd talk, it'd listen, then take the food and go. I started calling it Moses. Don't ask me why, just felt right. Something biblical about a being that comes and goes wrapped in mystery. Over time, Moses edged closer, 10 feet from the fire once, close enough for me to see details. The hair was uneven, longer on the arms and shoulders, shorter around the face and chest. The hands were huge, but human-like, with proper thumbs and nails, not claws. The feet were broad and flat, with a hint of an arch, explaining those tracks. But it was the eyes that got me. Intelligent. This wasn't some wild beast running on instinct. Moses was thinking, learning, watching me the way I watched him. He started to notice patterns. On bottling days, he'd appear when I finished, knowing I'd be too tired to move. On busy days, he kept his distance, as if he understood I needed focus. Then came the night that proved just how smart he was. I woke to find him standing over me, one massive hand raised in a clear stop gesture. Before I could react, he pointed down the trail. That's when I heard it voices, distant but closing fast. Nobody else would be up here at 2 a.m. federal agents. Had to be. Moses looked at me, then back toward the sound. The meaning was plain: hide your still or you're done. I jumped up and tore into the equipment, breaking down the condenser, copper coils, anything that screamed illegal distillery. Moses watched a moment, then did something that still chills me. He started helping. He hefted 2 50-pound sacks of cracked corn like pillows and stashed them in a cave, hauled the fermenting barrels with impossible speed. He followed my lead, anticipating what needed moving next. In 15 minutes, every trace of my operation was gone. Then he did one better. He moved to the trail where the feds would come through and started snapping branches, scuffing dirt, laying down false tracks that led them away from camp. He was covering for me, understanding not just that I had to hide, but how humans track. I staged the place like a backpacker's campsite. When the ATF agents rolled in, flashlights blazing, all they found was a few supplies and some jerky. One spotted Moses's prints and asked if I'd seen any bears. His tone said he knew damn well those weren't bear tracks. They cleared out inside the hour, spooked more than they let on. When their voices faded, Moses emerged, carried my gear back, and set everything exactly where it had been. He'd memorized the entire setup. That was when I realized Moses wasn't just some relic of the woods. He was reasoning, strategizing, protecting the arrangement we'd built. I gave food, he gave security. From then on, he started bringing things to me. First firewood cut, dried, stacked neatly by the pit, then pine cones, kindling, as if he knew the difference. I repaid him with bigger meals, even cornbread with honey, which made him rumble a deep, almost contented growl from his chest. Winter in Wyoming can kill the unprepared, and I worried for him. One night I tried to show concern, pointing to the sky, making shivering gestures, then toward the caves. He seemed to understand, but shook his head. Then he motioned for me to follow. He led me over a mile of brutal terrain like it was nothing, steadying me when I slipped, checking that I kept up. Finally, we reached a hidden cave system I'd never noticed. The entrance looked like a rock slide, but inside was warm, geothermal vents, a natural shelter, organized too. Sleeping areas, storage spots, even tools, stones, shaped for specific tasks. That's when I knew. Moses wasn't just surviving out here. He was thriving. He'd even shaped sticks into digging tools. Moses wasn't just smart. He was a tool user, a maker, a being with culture and practical knowledge. He showed me around like a proud host giving a tour. How he diverted water from an underground stream into a natural basin. How he stacked stones to capture and hold heat from the geothermal vent. In one corner, bones picked clean, sorted by size. Some deer, some elk, but others were bear. Moses was an apex predator. He could bring down a grizzly. But what stopped me in my tracks were the walls. They were covered in markings, not writing exactly, but deliberate carvings. Some looked symbolic: trees, mountains, animals. Others were more abstract, maybe a counting system, maybe a calendar. Moses was recording his world. He led me to one mark in particular. Pointed at it, then at me, then back again. Crude as it was, I recognized it instantly. It was me. He'd carved my likeness into his history. I wasn't just trespassing in his story anymore, I was part of it. The walk back to my camp was quiet, but not uneasy. It was the silence of trust. Somewhere along the line, we'd crossed from tolerance into something deeper. He wasn't just allowing me to exist on his land, he'd welcomed me into his world. When winter set in, his visits grew less frequent, conserving energy. I figured, but when he came, he stayed longer, sometimes hours by my fire. I'd talk about anything: my ex-wife, my kids who don't speak to me anymore, the things I'd run from in the mountains. And Moses, he listened, really listened. He'd let out soft sounds now and then, not words but responses. Sympathy when I spoke of loss, a kind of amused huff when I told funny stories, a low, worried rumble when I spoke of danger. He understood tone, context, emotion. This wasn't an animal reacting to noise. This was comprehension. One bitter night in January, the temperature dropped to 30 below. My little camp stove couldn't keep up, and I was burning through wood too fast. I was scared I wouldn't make it till morning. Then Moses appeared, arms full of fatwood pine soaked in resin, burns hotter and longer. He knew exactly what I needed. He stacked the logs carefully, then did something I'll never forget. He sat right beside me. His massive body blocked the wind. The heat rolling off him was like a furnace. We sat shoulder to shoulder through the night, him shielding me from the killing cold, me stoking the flames as if to comfort us both. By dawn, when the temperature finally crawled back to merely brutal, he stood to leave. But before he went, he laid one massive hand on my shoulder. The weight nearly staggered me, but the touch was gentle. Maybe gratitude, maybe acknowledgement, maybe just connection. Then he slipped away, leaving only tracks and the memory of warmth. February brought new trouble. A rival bootlegger, Curtis Hobbs, had been sniffing around, trying to find my still. He'd undercut me in town, bragged about his better product, and told anyone who'd listen my days were numbered. I knew he was looking to steal my setup, or worse, hand me to the feds. I told Moses about Hobbs one night, his truck, his look, the danger he posed. Moses listened with sharp intensity, eyes narrowing as I spoke of Hobbs's history of violence. 3 days later, Hobbs showed up at my camp in the middle of a run. I couldn't shut the still down without ruining the batch, couldn't fight without abandoning thousands of dollars in gear. He'd timed it perfectly. Well, well, he sneered, stepping into the clearing, shotgun cradled in his arms. Jake Harland, hell of a setup you got here. I kept working, voice steady. This is private land, Curtis. You're trespassing. He laughed, ugly sound bouncing off the rocks. Ain't no private land out here, Jake. Just wilderness and opportunity. And I'm thinking you're about to have an accident. Still explodes, you get caught in the blast. Real tragedy. He edged closer, the shotgun drifting in my direction. And then we heard it. A roar ripped through the trees, so deep and primal it shook snow from the branches. Not bear, not mountain lion. Deeper, angrier. My hair stood on end. Hobbs spun, gun up, just as Moses strode out of the timber. This wasn't the quiet giant who shared my fire. This was a predator in his domain. He stood tall, arms spread wide, chest heaving, bellowing again. Hobbs's hands shook. What the hell? He muttered, backing up. Moses advanced, slow and deliberate. Hobbs raised the shotgun. I thought for sure he'd fire, but Moses was quicker and smarter. He seized a pine tree thick as my thigh and wrenched it until it cracked like gunfire. The whole 30-foot trunk toppled, crashing down between them. Hobbs stumbled backward, barely avoiding being crushed. When he scrambled up, Moses was standing on the fallen tree, eye level and 20 feet away, radiating menace. The message was crystal clear: leave, or be part of the forest floor. Hobbs bolted, dropped the shotgun and ran like the devil himself was on his heels. 10 minutes later, I heard his truck engine scream to life, tires spinning as he tore out of the mountains. He never came back. Rumors spread fast that my operation was guarded by something unnatural. Other shiners gave me wide berth. Moses stayed visible until we were sure Hobbs was gone. Then, slowly, his posture softened. He circled me, checking me over, sniffing for blood, fear, danger. When satisfied, he did something that almost broke me. He hugged me. Not a human hug, exactly. More like a massive enfolding, wrapping those long arms around me, pulling me against his chest. I could hear his heartbeat, fast with adrenaline. We stayed like that for 10 seconds before he released me and stepped back. I tried to thank him, but how do you thank someone who saved your life when they don't speak your language? I just nodded and placed my hand on his arm. The hair was coarser than I'd imagined, but the skin beneath was warm, surprisingly soft. He set his huge hand over mine, covering it completely. We stood in that quiet recognition, no words needed. Spring came late that year. When it did, Moses changed again. He started bringing me gifts from the forest, not just firewood, but treasures, odd rocks, shed antlers. Once, a perfect eagle feather that must have taken him hours to find. He'd present each one carefully, watching my reaction before setting it by my tent. I gave food in return, of course, but also began leaving him other things. A steel knife to replace his stone tools, a tarp for his cave, even a pair of work gloves that looked laughably small on his hands but that he seemed to treasure. He studied each gift, turning it over, learning its purpose. The gloves fascinated him most. He understood their function immediately, but he couldn't stop tracing the stitches with a fingertip. A week later, I found a piece of deer hide near my camp, crudely sewn with plant fiber into a usable pouch. Moses wasn't just using tools, he was reverse engineering them, learning production from observation. By May, I had to make a longer trip supplies in Denver, gone at least a week. I tried to explain with gestures, 7 rocks for 7 days, pointing at the trail, at myself, walking away. He grew restless at the news, pacing, grumbling low sounds. Worried, maybe, about my safety, or about breaking our routine. I left extra food enough for 2 weeks and tried to reassure him. The trip took 9 days. Truck broke down outside Laramie, had to wait on parts. The whole time I worried. Would Moses think I'd abandoned him? Would he still trust me? When I finally trudged back into camp, I stopped dead. Everything was spotless. The still scrubbed clean, brass polished, firewood stacked with military precision. The ground around my tent cleared of debris. Moses had taken care of my place while I was gone. He showed up my first night back, but his approach was different. Hesitant, almost shy, he sat farther away than usual, watching me with what I can only describe as a hurt look. I talked more that night than I had all month, explaining the truck, the delay, showing him the new supplies I'd brought. Little by little, he edged closer until, near midnight, we were back in our usual spot by the fire. I'd brought him something special from town, a chocolate bar with almonds. When I handed it over, his eyes widened. He sniffed carefully, then took the tiniest possible bite. His face lit with pure delight. He savored that bar for an hour, stretching it out, eyes closed with each taste as if memorizing the experience. That's when it really hit me how lonely his existence must be. Moses was the only one of his kind I'd ever seen. No other tracks but his. No answering calls. He was alone in these mountains. Maybe alone in the world. What we had wasn't just convenience or mutual benefit. It was friendship for both of us. 2 outsiders who'd found understanding in the last place anyone would expect. Summer brought its own problems, more hikers in the backcountry, more federal patrols, and the constant fear of wildfires. Moses adapted with startling intelligence. He expanded his patrols, bringing word of approaching people long before they could stumble onto my operation. His warning system got sophisticated. Different knocks for different threats. 2 knocks meant hikers in the area but not close. 3 meant law enforcement. A long scrape signaled immediate danger. He even developed a way to indicate direction and distance with patterned sequences, something I learned to read like Morse code. One July afternoon, I heard a scrape followed by rapid knocking. I barely had time to throw a tarp over the still before a Forest Service helicopter thundered overhead. They were running aerial surveillance for illegal activity exactly like mine. Without Moses's warning, I'd have been caught red-handed. The chopper circled twice, saw nothing suspicious, just a backpacker's tarp over some gear, common enough in the Wyoming backcountry, and moved on. When it finally droned away, Moses stepped from the trees. He'd watched the helicopter with fierce concentration, processing the new information. Threats could come from above now, not just the ground. Within days, he'd adjusted our security. He started checking the sky, learned the sound of a chopper long before it arrived, even worked out a rough patrol pattern. He understood the schedule and timed his visits to avoid it. But but his most impressive bit of intelligence came during the Bennett fire in August. Lightning had touched off a blaze about 10 miles north, and wind was pushing it straight at my camp. I was getting ready to evacuate, trying to figure out what to haul, what to stash, when Moses appeared in broad daylight, something he never did. He was agitated, gesturing frantically to the east. Not south where the fire was, not west toward the road and civilization, but east into country I'd never explored. I tried to explain I needed to go west, to the road, to safety. Moses wouldn't have it. He actually took my arm and pulled me east. I had a choice: trust my instincts and run for town, or follow Moses into unknown wilderness with a wildfire bearing down. The desperation in his eyes made the choice for me. I grabbed essentials and went. He led me through a maze of canyons and ridgelines I never knew existed. The route was brutal but deliberate. Moses knew exactly where he was going. 2 hard hours later, I understood why. He brought me to a broad granite formation with deep overhangs, ringed by a natural firebreak of bare rock. We holed up there as the fire blew past smoke thick, but the flames couldn't reach us. Moses had known about this safe zone, had read the wind and the fire's speed, had realized the roads west would choke with evacuees and emergency vehicles. He saved my life with planning and foresight most people don't muster in a crisis. We stayed under that rock for 2 days while the fire burned itself out. Moses foraged for both of us, fetched water from a stream he knew, found edible plants I'd never have recognized. When it was finally safe to return, my camp was untouched. The burn had come within a 1/4 mile to the north, checked by a stream and a wind shift Moses had predicted. After that, the trust between us was absolute. He'd risked himself to save me, shared survival knowledge sacred to his existence, and I'd followed him without question into what looked like certain death. We were bound now in a way that outstripped species. Autumn arrived in classic Rocky Mountain fashion. Aspens gone gold, razor, clean air, and the constant bugle of elk in rut. Moses's behavior shifted with the season more active, ranging farther, staying out longer. I wondered if it was his mating season too, if somewhere out there another of his kind was answering ancient biological orders. But he always came back, often with gifts from his roaming. Once he brought a perfect obsidian arrowhead, clearly ancient and beautifully napped. Another time, a fist-sized chunk of turquoise. He was sharing his finds, treasures from his wanderings, trusting me with artifacts that might be sacred to his kind. In return, I started teaching simple things, basic knots, how to hone the knife I'd given him, how to read simple weather signs. Moses absorbed knowledge like a sponge. Days after I showed him a bowline, he was tying complex knots and lashings I'd never seen. The knife became prized property. He made a sheath from elk hide and wore it on a cord around his neck. He learned how to keep the edge true, even figured out a whetstone's proper use after watching me once. His tool use evolved fast. His craftsmanship got finer, more precise. He was undergoing his own Stone Age revolution, technological leaps it took humans millennia to achieve. October brought the first heavy snow and something else. Government scientists set up an environmental research camp about 3 miles from me, with equipment I couldn't identify and goals I could only guess. Moses found them first, and his agitation was unlike anything I'd seen. These weren't just threats to my still, they were threats to him. Trail cams, motion sensors, gear that could detect and record his existence. He understood instinctively that this technology could end his secret life. We made a plan. I'd be the distraction, keep the scientists' attention away from Moses's paths. In exchange, he'd elevate our security even more. Risky for both of us, but necessary. The first part worked like a charm. I dropped by their base now and then, playing the friendly local, offering shine and conversation. Most were geology grads eager for company, completely unaware of my real motives. I learned their survey patterns, their equipment limits, and where they planted sensors. Meanwhile, Moses became a ghost. He learned every camera's location, every sensor's range. He moved through their grid like smoke, never tripping a single device. When he had to cross monitored ground, he used deer and elk as moving cover, keeping to their shadows so their heat masked his. Technology wasn't our only problem. One scientist, Dr. Sarah Chen, was sharper than the rest. She found tracks, analyzed hair, noticed wildlife behavior that pointed to an apex predator the databases couldn't place. She started asking hard questions, pushing boundaries, getting too close to the truth. One evening, she followed me toward my camp. Not blatantly, but I know Moses' surveillance well enough to spot a tail. She was kind and professional, but Moses was better. He led her on a wild goose chase without her ever realizing it. Every time she drifted near something important, a convenient noise or movement drew her elsewhere. After 3 hours, she gave up, but not before a comment that chilled me. "There's something out here," she said back at their camp. "Something intelligent, something that doesn't want to be found." 2 weeks later, they packed out project, finished or abandoned. I never learned which. They left gear behind, live trail cams, solar panels still sipping Sunday. Moses and I took a day to strip everything, destroy memory cards, and erase any trace. That night, Moses did something new. He vocalized in what sounded like a language, not human speech, but structured sounds with repetition and rhythm that suggested meaning. He was trying to really talk, to convey complex ideas beyond what gestures could carry. I answered by mimicking his sounds, feeling for patterns. We spent hours in that rough conversation. I can't say I understood much, but the attempt felt profound. Moses was trying to bridge the gap between species, with language planting a seed that, with time, might grow into real communication. November hit hard, early blizzards, temperatures plunging without warning. I was running low on supplies, but the weather made a town run too risky. Moses noticed my rations, saw me eating less, saving fuel. He started hunting for me. Not just bringing scraps or foraged plants, but fresh meat. Rabbit one day, turkey the next, always cleaned and ready for the pan. He'd watched me long enough to know what I ate and what I left, tailoring his deliveries to my needs and preferences. The most moving moment came during a whiteout that pinned me in my tent for 3 days. The wind threatened to rip the shelter to shreds. I was genuinely afraid, low on water, nearly out of food, the cold bleeding through every layer I owned. On the second night, I heard digging outside. Moses was building a snow wall around my tent, a windbreak. He worked for hours in conditions that could have killed me in minutes. When the wall was finished, the difference was immediate. The wind still screamed, but my tent stood firm and sheltered. He didn't leave. For 3 days, Moses stayed close, maintaining the wall, bringing me snow to melt for water, even sharing his body heat during the coldest hours. We rode out the storm together, and when it finally broke, sunlight cutting through, the world turned to crystal. We'd become something more than friends. We were family. December brought new trials and discoveries. A documentary crew had caught wind of rumors about unusual wildlife in the Wind River Range. They came with high-tech gear, thermal drones, and a mission: get proof of the mystery creature. This wasn't like the scientists who'd wandered near the truth by accident. These people were hunting Moses. The strange showed in him. He paced, made agitated calls, even slapped trees in frustration. The safe country he'd known for so long was being invaded by people looking specifically for him. Every instinct must have told him to run, to vanish into new ground far from human intrusion, but he stayed. He stayed because I was there, because leaving would mean abandoning us. That loyalty humbled me. Here was someone who could disappear into the wild and never be found, choosing danger over flight because of our friendship. We leveled up our countermeasures. I monitored the crew's radio chatter with a scanner I'd brought from town. Moses learned the sound profile of their drones and could detect them long before they could detect him. We laid false tracks, false evidence, a disinformation campaign any intel outfit would have envied. The breakthrough came when Moses located their base camp while they were out filming. He didn't disturb a thing, left no obvious sign of intrusion, but he memorized their gear, their routines, their weak points. That night, he sketched patterns in the dirt, showing me camera placements and blind spots where they were vulnerable to distraction. Together, we staged a string of convincing missightings that drifted the crew away from both me and Moses's real range. I left subtle sign, broken branches, scuffed ground that suggested movement in specific directions. Moses laid down tracks that seemed authentic, aged just enough to be plausible, fresh enough to be exciting, but always old enough to suggest the creature had moved on. For 2 weeks, they chased ghosts, growing more frustrated as every promising lead dead-ended in empty backcountry. At last, they gave up on Christmas Eve. They packed it in and returned to civilization with nothing but blurry footage of elk and bear. That Christmas, I cooked a feast, spent most of what I had left, making cornbread, stuffing, elk stew, even a rough take on apple pie with dried fruit and honey. Moses arrived right as I was setting it out, drawn by smells that must have carried for miles. We ate together in easy silence. He sampled each dish with careful consideration. I enjoyed the simple joy of sharing a meal with a friend. When we finished, I gave him a Christmas present, a surplus army blanket, thick wool, the kind that lasts decades. He examined it with wonder, ran his hand over the tight weave, tested its warmth. Then he slipped away and returned an hour later with a gift for me. A rock, but not just any rock, a split geode, purple crystals glittering in the firelight. Who knows how far he'd carried it, how long he'd saved it, waiting for the right moment to share its beauty. January 2020 opened with a federal raid that nearly ended everything. Someone tipped them off maybe Hobbs's last shot at revenge. This time they came heavy. ATF, Forest Service, even a DEA unit. Helicopter, canine seconds, the works. Moses's warning bought me about 10 minutes. Not enough to hide it all, barely enough to destroy the most damning evidence. I doused everything with high-proof alcohol, ready to torch the lot when Moses did something unprecedented. He revealed himself to the humans not directly, but strategically. First, he showed himself to the dog unit. Just a glimpse through the trees enough to send the dogs into panic. German shepherds trained to charge armed felons bolted back to their handlers, tails tucked, refusing to track despite commands and cajoling. Then he started felling trees. Big ones. The crack of trunks echoed through the valley like artillery. Agents could hear something massive moving through the forest, closing in, circling their position. They tried to stay professional, but you could see fear in the way they moved, hear it in the pitch of their voices. The raid leader ordered a retreat after one of his men reported seeing a huge two-legged figure moving between the trees. They pulled back to their staging area to call for support, talking about possible bear attacks or unstable individuals in ghillie suits. By the time they came back with reinforcements, Moses and I had erased every trace of the still. We worked all night hefting equipment I could never move alone, me directing the hide with the ruthless efficiency that desperation brings. At sunrise, my camp looked like nothing more than a hermit's rough shelter. They searched 2 days and found nothing chargeable, just warnings about federal land use and vague threats of surveillance. But I saw it in their eyes. They'd felt something in those woods, something that made them want to be anywhere else. Moses had weaponized their primal fear without ever confronting them directly. February brought a different test. I got sick, really sick. Some kind of respiratory infection that left me weak and feverish. In town, that's antibiotics and bed rest. Out here, it can be a death sentence. Moses knew something was wrong before I did. He lingered near camp, checking on me several times a day instead of his usual occasional visits. When the fever hit hard, when I could barely crawl out of the tent, he took over completely. He brought water constantly, somehow understanding hydration was critical. He kept my fire going without being asked, even figured out the camp stove when the wood ran low. Most remarkable, he fetched medicinals, pine, needle, tea, and willow bark that actually knocked the fever down. For 3 days, I drifted in and out. Every time I surfaced, Moses was there watching, waiting, ready with water, food, or simply his presence. He made a low, steady rumble, almost a purr, but deeper, more resonant. Strange as it was comforting. It gave me something to focus on besides misery. On the 4th day, the fever broke. I woke clear-headed but weak as a kitten and saw Moses asleep upright, leaned against a rock by my tent. He looked wrecked, kept awake for days by the job of keeping me alive. When he stirred and realized I was sitting up really awake, the relief on his face was unmistakably human. He brought me soup he'd made in my pot with ingredients he'd gathered. It was genuinely good, seasoned with wild herbs, nourishing as anything I've ever eaten. We sat together while I ate, and he watched every spoonful like a worried mother. I tried not to cry at the tenderness of a being the world insists is only a myth.